Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. The next area that you find a lot of great leaders have, right? Effective communication. You brought it up initially at the beginning of our conversation that although everything in the world changes over time, one constant is the interdependency of effective communication with great leadership. You identify 4 dimensions in which you can improve your communication. Those dimensions are clear and accurate message transfer, active listening, charisma, and carriage skills. So I'd love for you just to kind of talk about the overview of these, and then maybe we can dive into that difference between carriage and charisma and how that can make you a more effective communicator.
Carriage and charisma. Carriage is the way in which you communicate. Do I deliver things clearly? Do I deliver things in a way that keep people engaged? It's more the mechanical side of communication. That's what I'm looking for. Charisma is the way that I can grab your heart and pull you in, that I can grab your motivation and yank that in the ways, the tone, the gestures, the facial expressions, the connections that I make with you. Those represent more the charisma that pull you in. For example, I've had managers that I sometimes call the manhole managers. They've had great carriage and respect and admiration from me. They do a great job of that. But I didn't like them. I didn't particularly like that person. And if I were looking out the window one morning and they were coming to work and they were in the parking lot walking toward the building and there was a big manhole open with no cover on it, I sometimes think to myself, I just hope they just walk a little bit more close. There you go. Get right in that hole. I didn't like them. The people with charisma, I was drawn to. And I would jump out the window, in effect, to protect them. So the charisma actually builds the relationship, the warmth and the engagement and the commitment, while carriage is showing that you have the skill and the ability to deliver things in an engaging, compelling way. And both of those work hand in hand and are certainly both important.
I love how you distinguish the two, because really it's the visual behaviors are more of the carriage skills. It's the first things people will notice, your facial expressions, the way you walk, your posture, and how you separate those out from the charisma piece, which is really the words, the tone, and the more language, the eye contact and the optimism that you have. Let's try to go through maybe just a few quick tips on each one. On first with those carriage skills, what could a leader do to improve that area of their leadership? What would you recommend first?
Well, there are just so many things, and I'm going to do some that I think are just kind of more interesting and fun because we do it all the time. But mostly to focus on things that we never normally would think of, but the impact is there. I mean, for example, here's a quick example. I've got my phone here. I'm going to start talking to you like this, and I'm going to say, look, Charles, one of the things we need to look at when we look at leadership is to recognize that pretty much everyone has the skill, but we need to start at an early age. And I would like to talk about that. And I continue. Now, I want you to feel the difference between this message and this message when I'm talking to you. It's rhetorical, but do you feel a difference?
I do.
Of course. And everyone does. Everyone would feel much more connected. By the way, I wasn't reading the phone. I wasn't looking at it. I wasn't doing anything at all. I never looked once at it. But you felt this sort of disconnection. And I'm sure that if you left the room and someone said the next day, what do you think of Steve? I don't know. I don't like that guy. You might reach that conclusion. And if they asked you to define why, I would challenge you to call it out. Everyone said that. Everyone's used that expression. I don't like that guy. Why not? Can't put my finger on it. That's the expression. I can't put my finger on it. But by the way, can't putting your finger on it, or intuition is what they sometimes call it, is not intuition. Intuition is a concept. The reality of the intuition is that I'm reading micro messages. Things like that, eye contact, facial expressions, tone of voice, responses. Do I respond with a yes when you say something, even if I disagree with you? I can disagree with you and start with yes. Yes, I totally understand what you're saying. And I can see why that would be something that, if it were applied well, could work in these areas. What I'd like to do, though, is show you another perspective and why I think that might actually get us there more quickly. That's how I can deliver my disagreement with you, rather than saying, Charles, that won't work. That won't work. Another example is giving someone feedback. I want to make sure I do a good job. I want to be a good leader. So I want to make sure I give Charles good feedback. So I come to you and I say, Charles, let me offer some suggestions that might help next time. It's fine. Or I could say, Charles, let me tell you what you did wrong. Now, I don't know about you, but I could hear the first one all day. I mean, when I say all day, I mean literally all day. Steve, let me offer some suggestions that might help next time. All day. On the other hand, I just need to hear one time, let me tell you what you did wrong. And I don't want to hear any more feedback. And you wouldn't either. And I tell people, if you just did that one thing different, just that one thing differently, you'd see a different level of receptivity by others to your feedback. It's a micro message change. These micro messages, no one's going to walk away thinking about the phrasing of that expression as you began the feedback. But if I hear you do it differently to different people, I walk away knowing that I'm not in that inner circle. And that's what we want to achieve as that evolved leader, is to motivate and inspire people to perform to their potential by recognizing some of these subtle cues that we both send and their influence on others, as well as the ones that we receive and their influence on us, and then being able to address them and fix them.
Absolutely. Tone, language, all of that plays a factor, and you demonstrated that so well through those examples. The other leadership trait that everyone says is in their top 10 when you ask executives what's one thing that they really need to have to be a great leader, that's persuasiveness. But once again, you kind of contradict that and say, okay, well, that's important and it's valuable when you're trying to advocate for project funding or staffing or a variety of operational needs. But if you're a team leader, it's one of the worst skills to exhibit.
Yes, absolutely. And thanks for bringing that one up, because in my opinion, that might be one of the worst perceived good, but ultimately bad skills to have. There are certain jobs or situations where all of us need to be persuasive. Certainly, if I'm an attorney, that's a core part of my job, of course. If I'm in sales or marketing, being persuasive is essential. And all of us have to be persuasive in certain situations, as you mentioned before, advocating for a budget. But as a team leader, we think it's one of the worst skills to possess. Because what does persuasiveness mean? It means convincing people to do something. I mean, here's an example. If, let's say I wake up this morning and I'm the boss and I have this brilliant idea and I'm very persuasive. What's going to happen when I get with my team the next time? At my very next team meeting, again, I'm the boss. I have the power. I'm very persuasive, and I've got this great idea. What's going to happen when I get to my team meeting? I'm going to try and persuade, that word persuasiveness, others to go along. I'm going to convince them. And we think that that's one of the worst things to do, because every one of the people at that table, and every one of you watching this clip right now, you were all hired because of your thinking capacity. None of you were hired because of your big muscles or your good looks, as impressive as they might be. You were all hired because of your thinking capacity. If that's the case, then how could I ever be a great leader if I don't tap the great minds of the people with whom I work to determine the viability of an idea, unconvinced, unpressured, unpersuaded by me? If I'm the boss, I have the ability to make whatever final decision I choose to make. We say great leaders do that. They tap those great minds with openness. They process it. And then they make what we would believe would be the best decision, not the one that I believe is the one that I need to drive over you. That's the reason we think persuasiveness is so terrible. By the way, in one environment, I thought that This wouldn't make sense. And that was military. We do a lot of work with, in particular, the Marines. And I was with a bunch of their generals. I think there are 20, well, I think it's 24, 25 multi-star generals. And I thought in this environment, everything as we might imagine is you take orders, yes, sir, no, yes, ma'am, and you salute to all, command and control. And in speaking with the commandant of the Marines, he said, what you just described is exactly what I find myself doing with my generals. I have the power. I'm the commandant. I work with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I have that power. But I always, unless we're on the battlefield conceptually, I always tap the great minds of the people with whom I work. I don't always go with what they say, but it always becomes a part of how I reach a final decision. That's what we want all of you, in effect, as leaders and as colleague leaders to do in the workplace as well.
Absolutely. Makes complete sense to me, even though it's counterintuitive the first time you hear it, because persuasiveness is one of those qualities that you associate with great leaders. Another common theme with leadership these days is being authentic in your leadership. It's all about authenticity. And you kind of turn this on its head as well, saying the goal is the goal, not authenticity. As long as the actions of your persona don't fall outside of your realm of core values, the goal is not to be authentic.
Yeah, I know, and that one does get a lot of pushback sometimes. But I will tell you also, after discussion about it, almost everyone, I mean, pretty much everyone, turns 180 degrees and they end up agreeing with this. Not that I'm trying to be persuasive, but I want to present perspective to them. And they often then embrace this perspective. Here's an example. The goal is the goal, not authenticity. Let me start with, because people say sometimes, be yourself. Authenticity, be your authentic self. And we've heard that for the last couple of decades now. Be yourself. Well, the question I would ask people is, who are you? Have you ever really taken the time to do a personal review of who you are and how that would be defined? It's an amalgam, of course, of many components, of many personas within us, and that represents who we are. But should we even focus on what or be what we believe we are instead of accomplishing the objective? Why are you there? Why are you in the workplace, in the business? You're in the business because it's a business. And the business is to be profitable, successful. It has objectives and goals. Your real mission should be then to accomplish the objectives and not be there to be yourself or have that in any way interfere with the accomplishment of those goals. I mean, in a fun way, just a kind of fun story with that. I had a boss. He used to always say to me, Steve, just be yourself. Be yourself. And I think about how that played out when people would look at themselves, and myself included. When you look at yourself after having been recorded giving a presentation, people look at themselves and they typically do something like this. They'll go, oh, oh my God. Oh, geez, do I really look like that? Look at my face. I just repeated myself like 5 times. Look, I just snorted. Can't believe I made that sound. Look at this. I don't like this either. I don't like that. I don't want to be him anymore. I want to be this person I develop and create. Well, which one is the authentic you? The snorter. But no one would have any problem being that other person, would they? I mean, another classic example is I look at someone like a Mark Zuckerberg. Being authentic would be for him to behave in the way that he does as an executive at Facebook. Wearing a t-shirt, jeans, and a hoodie. Coming into a professional work environment dressed like that. How was Mark Zuckerberg dressed when he testified before Congress on the 4 occasions that he has? Everybody knows that. White shirt, suit, and tie. Was he being inauthentic? Was he being a fake and a phony? And I would say no. It's really about being effective at what you do, as long as it doesn't fall outside of the realm of your core values. I don't want someone to fake it and wear a sari to connect with somebody who's of a certain profile. I want you to not step outside of the values, but I want you to do whatever it takes to accomplish the objective, as long as it falls within your core values. I was talking with a teacher about that, and she's in the book, Susan Richards. And she said, you know something? I have many different personas. There's the person who we really are, and there's the persona that we project. And all of us have or should have multiple personas. She said, I'm one type of, or I project one type of persona when I'm with my high school students. She said, I have a different persona when I'm communicating with my husband, of course. And yet another one when I'm dealing with my grandchildren. And yet another when I deal with my friends or neighbors, and so on. These are all her, but these are different components and personas that she projects. And the important part is, which is the authentic you? And in effect, as I mentioned, it's sort of an amalgam. But you take the one that's going to be most effective and apply it in the environment that gets you to the end game. And one more time, as long as it doesn't violate your core values.
Oh, that bears repeating. I mean, evolved leaders, they got to have that agility to assess each audience or individual with whom they interact with, adapt that persona while never being untrue to their own core values. Such an important distinction. And I am in complete agreement after I read the book and have changed my stance on authentic leadership because of it. Let's move to another big aha for me. And that was, how do you think about humility? You state that it's overrated. And you bring a great distinction in the book on, are you bragging or is it more self promotion or what you call productive advocacy?
Yeah. Interesting. I say that, and people also sort of recoil when I say humility is overrated. A little bit of the history of why humility is treated the way it is. Ego. Ego drives so much of the bad decisions that we make in life. They really do. Many of those decisions are made not based on wisdom or effectiveness, but self-protection, saving face, those kinds of things. So that's one of the reasons. But when we look at humility, it aligns with all of that. And I don't want to make someone feel bad. I don't want to do anything that suggests that I'm telling you that I'm better than you. We've all heard that expression 1,000 times. You think you're better than me? You think you're better than me? Nobody wants to be perceived as the person who does that. Well, some people do. We do know that. But in general, that's what we want to avoid. And you're thought of as a not so good person. You're kind of déclassé if you go around bragging. So you know what we do? We don't go near it. Just like what we see in our society today about cancel culture. I'm not even going to touch this subject. I won't go there because people will perceive if I even question why this government or that group is doing what they're doing, I'm going to be seen as the enemy. So stay away from it. Don't touch it. And as a result, you never get yourself out there. I remember this example of this guy, Dan. This was when I was working in Boston many years ago. The guy had an incredible profile. He was a Harvard Business School grad. He had run his own business successfully for a number of years, but he decided to get into this major corporation where he thought that would help him in the future. And tremendous successes, which I learned after getting to know him only because of a long period of time. Anyway, one of the hiring managers was looking for somebody to take on a role that he would have been perfect for. And he casually spoke with Dan, I later found out, about this job and views, and Dan gave his perspective and opinions, but never shared with the manager all of his great successes and attributes. Somebody else got hired for the job. I knew the manager. I said, do you know about Dan? Yeah, I talked with Dan. Do you know that he is a Harvard grad? No. You know, he business school? No, I didn't know that. You know, he ran his business. Do you know he did this, he did this, and I was like, no, I never knew all that stuff. And then I thought about it, and I said, Dan, he's so humble. You'd never know, the old expression, you'd never know that he's such and such. And we say that with admiration. Like, they're so wonderful for doing that. when in fact Dan missed out on a great job because he didn't know how to do effective advocacy, personal, productive advocacy of himself. You don't have to go around bragging. Obviously, I would never suggest that you go around putting people down and talking about how great you are, but that you do it well. Oh, by the way, in our personal lives, we shift that. It's amazing how that flips, Charles. I would never talk about my great grades to a stranger or even somebody who I was having a conversation with. I wouldn't say, I got this great grades in my test. I wouldn't do that. But at home, if your child comes home and doesn't tell you, hey, dad, hey, mom, I got straight A's in my report card, this, that, the other, or, today in school, I got my test back and I got a 93. It was the highest score in the class. Really? Yes, it was the highest score in the class. And I'm so happy and I'm so proud of you, son. Nobody would turn to their kid and say, just don't brag. Just keep it to yourself. Don't share it with anybody. Of course you tell your family. So why shouldn't you tell others? What's the fundamental difference there that it's okay to tell this person but not tell this person? And that's because of ego. So what we say is it is important for people to know what you can do, what your interests are, why you think those skills are good, how they can apply to the workplace, but without putting people down or flashing them. So that's some of how this humility is overrated plays out, because you miss out on opportunities.
When you have a great example in the book that I'd love for you to share, where it was with an executive VP at a major financial institution. He was the head of HR, and it was an in-person meeting. And as you were leaving the conversation, he asked you, where were you going to sit in the conference room? And your answer gave insight into where you thought you ranked in the hierarchy of the organization, and he challenged that.
I love that, and I have to just recognize him because he's one of my, idols. John Farrell, who was the head of HR for Chase Bank, for JPMorgan Chase, and it was my first 6 months on the job, and he had gotten to know me somehow, and he liked me and thought I had some potential for the company. But anyway, it was before this big meeting. It wasn't just in a conference room; it was a big lecture hall, with hundreds of people there. And I was speaking with him about 10 minutes or so before the meeting was going to get underway to make sure he had the information he needed on something. And I said, okay, John, thanks. And I started walking toward the back. And he said, wait, where are you going? Just as you said. I said, I'm going to take my seat. Well, where are you going to sit? I don't know, somewhere rather back there somewhere. He says, why don't you sit up here in the front? And I thought about it. And I was cautious to do that. And he explained to me that if you were to take the floor of a big meeting and lift it up, let me grab something that's flat. This is the floor. This is the front of the room. And you lifted it up like this, you'd in essence have sort of an org chart where you'd have the higher level, powerful people here all the way on down based on where they sit in that room. He said, don't fall victim to that, because the minute you take that seat, you've told everyone around you where you think you're supposed to be. He said, sit right up front. Talk to the people who have power. Let them get to know you. When opportunities come up, they know you. And the more you get to know them and share with them your advocacy, they will see you as a likely potential candidate for a role. You want to build those connections. And one way is to do that. And yes, it's something, thanks for bringing that up. It's something that has stuck with me, and I've infused that into the thoughts of everybody I interact with. When you're making those decisions, sit strategically to make a statement about where you think you should be fitting in.
It's a great story and a great lesson that all leaders should take to heart. As we wrap up today's episode, there's so much more to unpack in the book, but they're going to have to find that by reading your great book. But is there one action item that you recommend leaders take right away to improve their leadership skills and become a more evolved leader?
I would. And that falls into a category that we call stay interviews, quite frankly. Stay interviews are the, I was going to say brother, sister, sibling of exit interviews. Exit interviews are what we do when someone's leaving. We need to do a postmortem, Gee, why did they leave? And in most cases, it's like somebody leaving a relationship. Why did I do? Why are they leaving me? In some cases, we're happy they're gone. But by and large, we're stunned that the person is leaving us. And it's a loss. It should never be a surprise. And you should never lose anyone because they're not happy with the organization. This process of stay interviews, and we obviously not going to cover that in its full context here, but the concept of stay interviews is what you do to uncover everything that could possibly be a reason why someone might leave who is a desired hire well before they even think about going. And there are things involved in that involve finding out what their long-term goals are, and not just your basic development. I mean things like, oh, you're interested in marketing. Well, we're not in marketing, but let me connect you with Bill, who's the head of marketing. Sit down and learn more about what we do and how we do it. Well, I'm not planning to leave. I understand, but I just want you to feel comfortable and satisfied and knowledgeable about the things that you think are interesting and important. And you make that connection. And you uncover all sorts of things when you do a well-structured stay interview that enable you then to respond proactively to any of those issues. And I will tell you, and take this one to the bank, unless someone offers that person, 100% increase, they're not going anywhere. And more importantly, they're not going to start looking. Because people will stay even in places where they're underpaid if they feel that the environment is one that makes them feel respected, engaged, supported, encouraged, creative, innovative, and be able to perform and be recognized for it. That's what pulls people in. So that's one of the things I would focus on, at many of the elements that are defined within the category of these stay interviews.
Wonderful. That's something really to push forward with those stay interviews, and feeling value and appreciated is something that really makes a difference, like you said, with many employees. And great insight to end our episode on. Remind our listeners, Stephen, how they can get in contact with you and learn more about your work.
Certainly, thank you. The book that we're talking about, of course, which if they haven't seen it, of course, is The Power of Evolved Leadership, and it's available on on all platforms, Amazon and Walmart and everywhere else. And our first book is Micro-Messaging, and they work in concert with one another. This focuses on those subtle messages, whether it's holding the phone, making eye contact. A quick comment about that, if I could, before we break. If you talk to child psychologists, they will tell you that the number one reason that children act out is invisibility. They want attention. And if I'm not getting the attention from you, I will do whatever it takes to get it, even if it's to do horrible, bad things, because at least I'll get your attention, even if it's scolding me, but I have your attention. Adults are not that much different. People want your eye contact. They want your engagement. They want those connections. They want people to know what's important to them and how to get there, all the things that we've touched on, and a lot more. So that's something that we think is an important part of moving this forward. Also, to get in contact with us, the website is insighteducationsystems.com.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.